Education reforms are absolutely necessary. There is no question about it. The system is has broken down. It doesn't serve any other functions at the moment, and that's from the lowest to higher education and postgraduate education. So that's clear. And I would like to take this opportunity to say that what the Parliamentary Oversight Committee said. There are 4 principles which they said should be there. None of that was there. You see, basically, the previous Vikramasinghe's account was education purely as an investment. Now you see, the trouble with that is, certainly there is an investment component, you need a return, but it's not only that.
This whole thing is just 27 pages of a PowerPoint.
Yes, in English.
Nothing beyond that.
Nothing beyond.
Right. You better continue because I'm not too sure what to ask next.
Yeah. You know, an O-level credit in English you can get through doing multiple choice. So they have an inferior complex or an imposter complex. The training is done again by the NIE. So I think we need a new system, particularly if you're going to teach them continuous assessment, if you're going to devalue the emphasis on exams, which is important.
Education reforms were previously restricted to the changing or the tweaking of the syllabus, and even that didn't happen on most occasions. Nothing else was done. So the government of Sri Lanka has introduced or is in the process of introducing in-depth changes to our education system. The development of the child as a rounded person is the aim of these reforms. What's right? What's wrong? That's the debate in the both established media and on social media. To talk about the proposed education reforms, to give his views, I'm joined by Professor Arjuna Parakrama. Arjuna is a professor of English at the University of Peradeniya, and he's also a director of the Center for Study of Human Rights at the same university. His educational background is impressive. A BA Honours in English from the University of Peradeniya in 1981, and the icing on the cake, so to speak, is Master of Arts in English from the University of Georgia, USA in 1985, and a Doctor of Philosophy, a Ph.D. Culture Studies program from the University of Pittsburgh, USA in 1990. And Professor Arjuna Parakrama continues to be at the Peradeniya University as a lecturer of English or in English, he will correct me. Very warm welcome, Arjuna, to this program.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to clarify, I'm now after 20 odd years serving as chair professor in the tradition of Professor Ludovic and Professor Passe and people. I'm Emeritus professor now. So I still carry the rank and title and do some work. But yeah, I'm involved in other matters as well while doing that academic work. Thank you. I'm very happy to be around.
My pleasure to have you on board, Arjuna. I started off in my intro that we are in the process of going through an intensive reform, or full overhaul, rather than tweaking the education system. All credit, due credit should go to the government of Sri Lanka. How do you look at it?
I think that's important, but I think for the record we need to say the educational reforms process began quite early, much before this government. Right? In fact, I don't know whether many of our readers or listeners know that the National Education Commission is the apex body appointed by the President that actually should talk about education policy. We don't really have education policy at the moment. The National Education Commission published a report on education for 2020-2030. This came out in 2024. An excellent book. Unfortunately, it's about 440 pages long and it's extraordinarily good. What we need is a summary of that and a discussion and so on. Then the previous government, led by Ranil Wickremesinghe, November 2024, he trashed that particular document, which was done, and he produced a national education policy framework. with 25 people appointed. There's been lots of controversy, we don't want to go into that, about who they were and so on. Now that was debated, and Parliament, actually the Oversight Committee, had some very important observations on that. So it's in that context that the current government is now taking on its education reforms. Unfortunately, so let me start at the beginning. Education reforms are absolutely necessary. There is no question about it. The system is completely has broken down. It doesn't serve any other functions at the moment, and that's from the lowest to higher education and postgraduate education. So that's clear. The government has recognized this, as has previous governments. So I think that's important. Unfortunately, what has been provided to the public as the education reform package by this government is purely one section on curricular reform and on curricular development. So it is actually what we have is a 27-page PowerPoint in English, which was presented by this government, focusing only on curriculum development.
The 421 pages, the initial document or whatever the numbers, the big numbers, then it was whittled down to...
It wasn't whittled down. An entirely different thing was produced by Wickramasinghe.
Right. And now what are we talking
Now we are talking about something that the NPP government has, which is only one part of it. It is the curriculum development section. That too, there is no concept note or anything like that. It's just 27 pages. Some of it are very good. But of course, what is missing is the public discussion. Particularly because the members of this government joined us in a protest against the document produced by the Wickramasinghe government. That was what you call the NEPF, the National Education Policy Framework 2024. That was the Parliamentary Oversight Committee also looked at it. And I would like to take this opportunity to say that what the Parliamentary Oversight Committee said. There are 4 principles which they said should be there. None of that was there. You see, basically, the previous Wickramasinghe's account was education purely as an investment. Now you see, the trouble with that is, certainly there is an investment component, you need a return, but it's not only that. So the Parliamentary Oversight Committee has these 4, and I think this is globally best practice. First is to respect free education, which is something that we have had from Form 47 and beyond, which is something that is very crucial. So respect for free education. Second, which we don't have in our constitution, is education as a fundamental right, the inclusion of that. Third is, I think this is the most important thing, which is that education, any policy of education should work towards removing disparities between and among schools and other educational institutions. And I'll tell you an interesting fact in that. You know, the education is structured by zones in this country. There is the Colombo zone, which contains these schools like Visakha, Royal, Ananda, Devi Balika, and so on. Now, based on O-level results of more than 20 students, the best results in the country, not surprisingly, comes from one school in Colombo. But what is surprising is the worst results in the country comes from a same school in that same zone, 10 kilometers away from that best school. So do you understand? So the disparities are huge. Now what we are saying is that any reform should address those disparities. These so-called national schools, which is also an anomaly I hope we can talk about, have 50, 60, even 70 extra teachers hired and paid for by old boys and old girls associations and parent teachers associations, and whereas the other schools don't have teachers.
That gets the desired result.
Yeah, it gets the desired result. So it's a self-perpetuating kind of thing. So we're saying disparity needs to be removed. There are schools with very few children. There are schools, for example, that we visited in the plantation area. The entire school is 42 perches. Playground, everything included. There's one classroom, about maybe 25 by 25. The students in year 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 study. But of course, the only students who study are with the teacher with the loudest voice. So everybody, if teacher of grade 4 has the loudest voice, everybody is studying grade 4 because you can't hear anything else. So what we're saying, so that's the fourth one. The fifth one is a very progressive. It says, no attempt at educational reform will work unless basic needs of children are met, particularly school feeding. We've had a good program, but that also has broken down and there are issues. So we are saying those 4 principles need to be very clearly enshrined in anything. Unfortunately, because this is only a 27-page PowerPoint, It doesn't contain any of that.
This whole thing is just 27 pages of a PowerPoint.
Yes, in English.
Nothing beyond that.
Nothing beyond.
Right. You better continue because I'm not too sure what to ask next.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, and it has good points. It's actually looking at including skills and capabilities that go outside the syllabus, looking at things like the employment areas, technology and stuff like that. But only being a PowerPoint, it does not say how we are going to serve this. Let me give you an example. There are, and it talks about science and STEM and so on. There are roughly, depending on who does the count, about 10,100 students, give or take, schools, give or take, in the country. Various figures. So under 10,100. But of which only 900 odd have science at the A level. They are called 1AB schools. So therefore, when you talk about STEM and so on, if a student is in a rural area, they have no access. So they don't get that stuff. And then if you look at the number of schools, I have the data, the number of schools that are very small and in very remote areas, about more than 35% of all the schools. You see the problem. That's why we say that third point is crucial. We need to remedy the sort of and make a minimum thing, which is the baseline. If you look at schools, again that 2030 report says 6% of schools have no electricity. Even higher percent of schools have no water. The number of schools that don't have toilets. You see, so we're talking at that level, particularly girls have to come to school and then wait till school is over till they go home in order to use a toilet. There are no toilets. As I said, there are shared classrooms, there are no materials, and if school feeding doesn't take place, that I don't know whether you know, Amartya Sen, A.K. Sen said, for development projects, he said, one of the best things to do is do school feeding, everything else will sort itself out. Parents will sell their kids, nutrition will be there. So that's something we need to prioritize.
And that's very true, not just in the developing world, but even in developed countries.
Exactly.
Those who have had welfare programs and due to various financial constraints they have given up. Now they have reintroduced that. That actually is one of the main points for children to come to school fairly early before the normal period or the school starts, because they have breakfast at school.
Exactly. And that too needs to be done where the parents, the teachers and all get involved in preparing the meals. I think what has been done in the previous government is given to some businessmen to do it. So naturally they run short of money and so on. So anyway, to come back to these reforms, so we have 27 pages of stuff. Some of it is very good, some of it is quite frightening. And so my position, this is what I say, is I have a lot of regard for the Ministry of Education and the system. These reforms that are being suggested at the curriculum level were actually prepared under Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2019 and they're being rehashed and they've come now. I don't think this government even owns this in a proper way, because the National Education Commission has not been involved. The NIE, the National Institute of Education, is statutory body for curricula. They have been doing it, and I'm sorry to say, but they don't have the capacity for this. They have never had the capacity for it, right? So it's their reform. But what many of the opponents of this are focusing on is the ridiculous elements. For example, I've also been somewhat guilty. They say there is a subject called philosophy/logic ? Now, that means somebody who put it there is not sure whether it should be there or not. The question mark is not a philosophical question mark. So, that's not been edited. Mathematics is in some case under entrepreneurial skills. Management includes economics. Economics is not so. But I think those are not the issues. Those can be sorted out. What is the issues is, where is the dialogue? Where is the discussion? I'll give you one example. The last slide of this, and I think they have something, is the task force for education reforms consists of, they're going to appoint a task force, National Education Commission, the apex body, Ministry of Education, Higher Education and Vocational Education, National Institute of Education, the one I told you, the NIE, the Department of Examinations, the Department of Educational Publications, so that's all the government, and the private sector.
Just private sector.
Just private sector. So no teachers, no unions, no other stakeholders, no. So naturally, I can't even understand the mindset that would do that. If we said only government people, that's also a problem. Government and private sector
as well there.
But without the key stakeholders are the teachers, the students, the academics, nobody there. So what I'm saying, my worry is, this was prepared, we know fairly well, to fulfill a World Bank grant of large amount of money. We hear 200 million or something, and was just pushed through. And this poor government is now saddled with it because it has come out in the tenure of this government, so they have to defend it. So it's full of these issues. What we ask is, let's have a conceptual paper, let's discuss. We all agree reform is crucial and reform needs to start. We think there are, aside from that disparities issue, imagine within 10 kilometers you have the best school in the country and the worst school in the country, and that's going to, that's going to affect those students. I mean, so disparities across regions are high, but discrepancies within regions are even higher, And so what do? We talk of IT, we talk of AI, and there's no electricity, there's no toilet, there's no water supply, So what we're saying is that we need to look at that 2020-2030 document. That's a very good document. It's too large, of course, and it's only in English. Now, this is also a PowerPoint in English. Somebody should translate this into Sinhala and Tamil, because education is something that everybody has something to say, right? And we need to, at least in part, gear it to the market. But there also should be components that talk about good citizens, about concern, about, inclusivity and all of that kind of stuff. So this doesn't do any of that. So as a result, the government has now become embroiled in a huge controversy. I think we need to start again with a discussion. Why do we want education? For whom? Different groups require it for different purposes. What is the minimum standard we're going to give, and all of that. And there the current government had an education policy. It's very good. It's a very good policy. But let's take a good example of that. They want to abolish, I don't know whether you know, there's a year 5 scholarship exam. That's an exam that is taken, and it has created a lot of problems and tensions and all of that. But, so removing the year 5 scholarship exam is necessary. But before you do that, you must remove the reasons for having the year 5 scholarship exam, which is schools that have no facilities at all and schools that have all the facilities. So if you send somebody to Royal College, your son's life is assured because the old boys network, In the UK, there are, every city has an OBU for Royal College, you know what I mean? In the US. So the point is, if you're in a small school, so that's why just removing it won't help. This disparity issue has to be sorted out. I think that's very important. So we are on board 300%. We've been there right through, and this can be done bipartisan or multipartisan. Education reform is crucial. Some of the elements here are excellent, that where they say you don't focus it on exams, you have to devalue exam. But the problem is, teachers need to be trained. Now there are 14 new subjects recommended by this. It's going to start next year in year 1 and year 6. Teachers have not been trained. Teachers don't even know.
Training the teacher is also very important.
Particularly when you have 240,000 teachers. Now I'll talk about my subject, English. There are about 20,000 plus teachers. I say this with utter shame that of the 20,000, a good 15,000 are not competent to teach English. Because they've come through a system in which,
they are English teachers, but they are not
competent because the bar was an O-level credit at the time. An O-level credit in English you can get through doing multiple choice. So they have an inferiority complex or an imposter complex. The training is done again by the NIE. So I think we need a new system. Particularly if you're going to teach them continuous assessment, if you're going to devalue the emphasis on exams, which is important, you can't replace it with some ad hoc thing. Then the teachers need to be taught how to do assessments. Student needs to understand how that happens. Do you understand? Otherwise, there will be all kinds of claims of injustice and discrimination and so on. So I think we are at the crossroads. We really need to get this done properly. Education has failed us both in terms of what learning takes place and what kind of citizens it produces. I'm all, for example, for a course that talks to them about reasoning and thinking and how to make an argument, how to evaluate an argument. These are things which need to be done. So my main criticisms that go back again is no public discussion. That's very, very important on a matter like this. We need a concept to say where we are going. The NEPF, the one I told you, Ranil Wickramasinghe's one, the concepts were pretty awful. And I think the present government joined us in opposing them, because there it basically said, we are not very interested, the state should not get involved in education and so on. But one of the elephant in the room here is we have 397 international schools. International schools, 7 of which are registered with the BOI. So those 397 schools have no connection at all with the education department. They don't need to show they have teachers, they don't need to show they have syllabuses, they don't need to show that they are doing anything. They have to just show a balance statement, a bank statement. Now that should be addressed. Now that's a priority. Because the number of parents, I don't know whether you know, the fees are high. They mortgage land. They do extra jobs. They get into debt to send their schools to these, which are not regulated at all. Then of course we have this huge private sector, what we call English tuition, That is one of the biggest industries in this country, non-tax paying, whatever it is. And so that's what, that in this country, the final advanced level year, this is year 13, the number of students who attend schools is less than 5%. They are in tuition classes.
I see. Yeah. So the attendance at school is near minimal.
Yeah.
And very low. And they are getting tuition.
There's tuition classes, 1,000 students, 500 students. Yeah. And the people who can pay more then get what they call smaller classes and better attention and so on.
But doesn't the tuition class culture reflect something that's missing in our national education system? Therefore, they are going outside of the mainstream.
Well, the answer you may not like. It is partly because we have moved from mixed education, which is I think what's followed in most places except for these silly British public schools or whatever, where there's mixed education. Yeah. Now many of the schools are either boys only or girls only and so on. So this is the way of interacting socially in an accepted way. So that part. But we should have, all our schools should be mixed. That
mixed or co-ed.
Co-ed, yeah, whatever they call that, yeah. So one is that this is an avenue for students to go out and socialize and all of that kind of stuff. And then the other question is, teaching is inadequate. There is no monitoring of the teaching. So it's not strange that the same tuition master doesn't teach his class, but he has a tuition class in which all his students have to go and pay. In fact, there is an interesting thing, I don't want to go into details, but in the Western province, there was a rule which saying that you should not teach your own students in a tuition class. That was
abolished.
Yes. Within this government, somebody in power got it removed.
So there are anomalies in the system, the current system. What I did not know, thank you for enlightening us, Arjuna, was that the policy that's been proposed currently is 27 pages of a PowerPoint presentation.
Which is mainly curriculum, nothing else.
Nothing else. So in your opinion, so this is not a sort of a full overhaul of the system, but perhaps a sticky plaster solution.
It's not even that, it is somebody else's. I'll give you an example. There is an implementation arrangement structure, right, which talks about the implementation. In that, the old name of the ministry is there. They haven't even changed the name. So it's called Ministry of Education, which was the ministry under the previous government. Now it's the Ministry of Education, Higher Education and Vocational Education. So it's called that old name. So they have not even bothered. See, the bureaucracy is the problem here. I have no doubt in my mind the government is fully intent on the reform. But the bureaucracy has been part of the problem earlier. Our bureaucracy represents that, particularly education bureaucracy, represents the old thing, which is the king is dead, long live the king. Yeah. So the same people who did the previous stuff are now spearheading the same stuff. So what can you expect?
And tweaking it.
Yeah.
So to end this program on a positive note, Arjuna, academia basically, people including your good self, are you as a body individually or as a collective of people, individuals, happy to advise the government or perhaps voluntarily submit proposals how best to further enhance this program, etc., so that we get a much better desired outcome than what is being focused?
I think that's an important question. We have long been advocates of change. I personally, I can speak also for the unions that I was a member of. We are happy to be involved in the discussion. We want to be involved. But I think there's a difference between being involved in the discussion and being informed of the changes. Now, in the meetings that have been is to inform us of this and they don't even know what it is. So the 27 slides have become 6 and 7 because they keep, when we point to one being ridiculous, they remove that. And they, so yes, 100% we should be involved. We want to be involved, and we are quite happy to be involved at any level as long as it's a discussion and so on. We are willing to provide inputs, we are willing to provide expertise on lessons learned, we are willing to advise even organizations like the NIE, which we feel is completely part of the problem. Anybody can see the NIE needs to be recapacitated, to provide new capacity and so on. They need to, the same old people cannot be in charge because all they know is that same old kind of thing. Now, if you look at English, as I said, they are not qualified, but they produce postgraduate diplomas and master's degrees in English like there is no tomorrow. And those are not qualified. They don't have the confidence of teaching. So to reiterate, we should be there, we want to be there, and we are happy to be there in whatever capacity we ask, because we believe the government has good intentions. They understand the key problems, right, in terms of this education and so on. But I think they also need to address some of the vexed political issues. The private tuition is a very political kind of thing, but there's lots of money and money given to all the parties. The lobby. The second is this international school thing. In what country can you have education systems that are not accountable to the Ministry of Education in any form? We don't know what they're teaching. So that needs to be attended to. We also look at, let's work out ways of understanding the disparities. Now the argument, this is a very important argument because I think your listeners will be interested. The idea of small schools. The government is now of the view that you should close down small schools. We oppose that because those small schools represent marginalized, disadvantaged students. I'll give you one example and you may be shocked. In 21st century Sri Lanka, there is a school I know which has 8 to 10 students because those students are undercaste. Those students their parents are engaged in a profession that... So it's interesting, a small school, around it are large houses. None of those people will send to this school. So you close it, these students will have no education whatsoever. And if they go into the other school, they'll be marked. You're coming from that school, that means you're this particular kind of thing. So we need to protect those. We need to protect those students. And they say the policy, the NPP policy was every school for 4 kilometers, but you need to see what that's not being followed here. So we are saying the NPP policy is excellent, implement that here. This is different. That is why there is no concept room, because they can't produce a concept note here which is consonant with their policies because this is somebody else's concept. You see the problem there. So we should start from scratch. So even these estate schools, plantation schools, 4 kilometers uphill, downhill, no buses and so on is a lot. I know I've been to a school which is in a sort of literally a place which was formerly a fertilizer dump. These students are learning there. So those need to be upgraded and so on, because every child must get an education, and the whole national school concept, I think we should rethink that. Why should there be schools that are special? You know what the national school happens? The national schools, money comes from the center. So the province has no control, the district has no control, the zone has no control. If you're in a national school teacher, then you don't get transferred except, so that's like a supra class. This government is agreed in principle. We should remove that concept. You should have schools based on whether they teach up to O level, their primary, secondary.
But that's not in the 27 pages, right?
None of that is in this. We need to address those things, I think, and bring the stakeholders in for a discussion. The unions are important, Unions should be. Otherwise, what happens is the unnecessary debate on should philosophy be in this section, should mathematics be in that section. Now the whole argument is where should history be? Is history compulsory or not? Now to me, if they really think the thing out from first principles rather than copying something that was done 5 years ago by the NIE, which is part of the problem, then we are on a good wicket. They should not defend this. Let's start from the beginning, work with what we have. We believe in the same thing, that I want to say.
That's really heartening to hear from the sector that's supporting educational reform, not just confined to a few pages of a presentation, etc. Arjuna, thank you so much for coming on this program and airing your views very clearly, pros and cons. That was, ladies and gentlemen, Emeritus Professor Arjuna Parakrama. Thank you.